Standing where the desert drops down into the Nile Valley in Egypt are the three pyramids of Giza. This is the Great Pyramid, the largest of the three and the most massive man-made edifice on Earth. In the 24th century before Christ, 30 million tons of rock were hewn and dragged over the desert and formed into these monuments, which are to an accuracy and size that we could barely emulate today. These mansions of eternity, as they were called, were faced in gleaming white Tura limestone, and possibly with a huge gold cap on the top. In spite of the staggering statistics of their construction, there were few hard facts to explain what the pyramids were for, until recently. A new breed of high-tech archaeologists has presented startling evidence which may explain the unknown beliefs of distant Egyptian history. In particular, as we shall show, they are revealing extraordinary insights into the mysterious star-worshipping cult of the ancient Egyptians. Indeed, they believe there may be some cosmic design to these ancient structures. Can the modern age of technology shed light on the spiritual world of the past?
I fly up from you, O men. I am not for the earth, I am for the sky. I have soared to the sky as a heron. I have kissed the sky as a falcon. I am the essence of a god, the son of a god, the messenger of a god. Behold, the faithful and loving Osiris has come as the stars of Orion, the beautiful one. I have come that I may glorify Orion. My soul is a star of gold, and with him I will traverse the sky forever.
This strange and beautiful poetry comes from hieroglyphs carved by the ancient Egyptians on sarcophagi and on the walls of tombs. These pyramid texts, as they are called, are some of the earliest religious writings known to man. Although they were deciphered over 150 years ago, today they're being re-examined in the light of new theories about the ancient Egyptians' perception of their world and their man-made mountains. Going back to the beginnings of Egyptian history, from the time of the Roman occupation, is a long journey. Back through the Roman emperors to Augustus, then Cleopatra, the last of Egypt's Ptolemaic Greek rulers, back to the first Greek conqueror, Alexander the Great, then the Persian kings, then 31 dynasties of pharaohs encompassing the reigns of almost 400 individual kings. Taking us back 5,000 years to the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, who first united and civilized the kingdoms of Upper Egypt along the Nile and the fertile delta known as Lower Egypt. The period we are interested in is the early beginning of Egyptian civilization, the Old Kingdom, known as the Pyramid Age, and in particular the Fourth Dynasty, which lasted from about 2600 BC to 2500. In just the short 100-year span of this dynasty, conceivably one person's lifetime, all these near-perfect pyramids were built. What vision drove those pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty to such size and precision, while their successors in the Fifth Dynasty settled for this? In spite of their dilapidated state, they contain a clue to the mystery of the achievement of the previous Fourth Dynasty pyramids. These pyramids are at Saqqara, 10 miles south of the Great Pyramid, near the ancient capital of Memphis. The builders of these now ruined pyramids undoubtedly knew the legends of their ancestors, including the ancient Egyptian worship of the stars, and their belief that the stars were manifestations of their gods. Two authors who have just written a book on the subject are Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert. They are taking us into the crumbled pyramid of the 5th dynasty pharaoh Unas, where the first clues to their new discoveries lie. In spite of its pitiful state, this pyramid is the first to contain any formal writing.
Now look at this. This is this fantastic, unlike the 4th dynasty pyramids, which were totally devoid of text. These crumbled 5th dynasty pyramids are full of these fantastic writings.
You just look up at the ceiling. I mean, it's absolutely covered with stars. It's just like being out under the night sky.
They constitute the oldest body of religious writing in history. And they're there on the walls to help the dead king into his voyage into the afterworld.
These are pyramid texts and accompanied the mummy that would have been in this tomb, hopefully providing the required mystical hymns and prayers to help the royal owner's journey into the next world. The act of inscribing an idea did more than merely record it. It had magical significance. It was a spell, and had the power to ensure that the written sentiment would actually happen. This, for example, is a snake with its head cut off. This would ensure protection of the soul from snakebite. These texts also show this shape known as an ankh, which symbolized the life force, and their reverence for the great god Atum. And these writings talk repeatedly of the pharaoh becoming a star and traveling to the constellations.
This hieroglyph symbolizes Sobed, which is their name for Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, which they associated with the goddess Isis.
And here is the name of the king Unas in the oval-shaped cartouche. And here we are told he is given life and he is the beloved of the supreme god, his father Atum. Now the pyramid texts, together with the ancient later papyrus, known as the Book of the Dead, tell us about the beliefs of these ancient people.
And most importantly, they tell us how the Egyptians believed civilization began in their country so many thousands of years ago.
The creation myth of the ancient Egyptians is constantly repeated in pyramid texts on the walls of tombs and on funerary plaques. It was of prime importance to them, and they saw each successive pharaoh reenacting it.
In the beginning, Atum Ra, the great sun god, looked down on the newly formed land. He sent one of his grandsons, Osiris, to live among its people, to teach them goodness and civilization. Osiris, both man and god, walked the land of Egypt with his consort Isis, and it became a beautiful place. Alas, Osiris's brother Seth was jealous of him and murdered him. He cut his body up into 14 parts and scattered them around Egypt. Isis, overwhelmed with sorrow, roamed the land in search of Osiris. Eventually, finding all the parts, she bound them up with muslin strips and brought his body back to life, just long enough to place herself on his phallus and take his seed. Osiris then ascended from the land of Egypt, leaving Isis hiding in the bulrushes of the Nile Delta. She bore a son, Horus, who grew up to avenge his father's death. Isis, her earthly mission fulfilled, joined Osiris in the stars.
The stars then in this night sky were seen by the ancient Egyptians as a heavenly counterpart to their own land, inhabited by gods and the souls of the departed. The main feature they saw down here was the Nile, and when they looked up into the night sky, the main feature they saw up there was the Milky Way, a shimmering band of stars arching across the sky. And this, they believed, was the celestial Nile. The Nile was held in great awe. Each year it mysteriously flooded and spread fertile mud over the land, and as the country was surrounded on either side by barren desert, it depended totally on this yearly miracle. But how did they explain their good fortune? Well, the time of the flooding coincided with the reappearance of the constellation of Orion in the night sky, having been out of sight for 70 days. So naturally they associated the stars of Orion with Osiris, the god who cared for them and from whom all blessings flowed. And there he was looking down on his benign handiwork beside the banks of the celestial Nile. And to the left of him is the star Sirius, which they saw as his consort, Isis, because it was bright and beautiful and followed Orion across the sky. There they rule the heavenly kingdom. They rule by night. Theirs is the kingdom of the dead. And by day, Ra, the great sun god, rules the land of the living. As for Autumn, who created it all, well, Ra with all his power has taken over, but he allows Autumn to be the god of the setting sun after the business of the day has been done. The ancient Egyptians' creation myth describing good and evil and linking the earth and the heavens is all very beautiful, but what does it tell us about the pyramids?
When you're looking at the pyramids, you're looking at religious architecture. And if you think of other religious architecture, such as the great cathedrals of Europe, if you want to understand those, you've got to look at the Bible, which will explain why they're cross-shaped and so on. And in the same way, if you want to understand the pyramids, you've got to look at their religious literature, which is the pyramid texts.
Clearly, we're looking at a situation where an idea sparked in the mind of some great architect priest. There must have been a very powerful motive behind this idea. You don't start a construction plan raising monuments to heights of 100 meters without being very motivated.
In order to find more clues to the mystery of why they were so motivated, it's necessary to look at the whole area. Egypt is normally seen like this, with north at the top. The ancient Egyptians, however, made their maps facing south. Their whole world view faced south, and the stars that reached the height of their arch through the sky due south was their directional benchmark. The fertile delta known as Lower Egypt, where the Nile flows into the Mediterranean, is thus at the bottom, and the long, narrow Middle Nile, known as Upper Egypt, is at the top. The three great pyramids at Giza, built by the pharaohs Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaura, are therefore here, and we're going to examine the first and largest of them, Khufu's Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid has four major internal features: an underground chamber that could possibly predate the pyramid, the Queen's Chamber on the exact center line, thought until recently to have been abandoned, and a spectacular grand gallery that leads up to the King's Chamber. The vast grand gallery with its converging stepped walls is considered a triumph of the mason's art. This is the entrance to the King's Chamber. The roof as well as the walls are made from Aswan granite, which gave a hard and holy ring to every sound. The only object in the chamber is the sarcophagus. This was the first sarcophagus to be used by a king, in this case, Khufu. It seems its lid has long since been smashed up and his bejeweled body stolen. The only other feature is the entrance to two tiny 8-inch square shafts that are meticulously crafted and travel at precisely maintained angles throughout the masonry of the pyramid. Beauval and Gilbert maintain that probing the secrets of these shafts is central to understanding the function of the pyramid. Traveling out from both chambers are four small 8-inch square shafts, a north shaft from the king's chamber and a southern shaft. These both extend through to the outer casing of the pyramid, a northern shaft from the queen's chamber, which does not reach to the outer casing and was also closed at its inner end, and finally a southern shaft, again closed at both ends. This is the entrance to the southern shaft of the queen's chamber. Originally, it didn't come right through. It stopped a couple of inches back, suggesting its function was ritualistic rather than practical.
You have what I call a...
Jean Carizel is a leading French construction engineer and geological consultant. As he was taking part in the building of the Cairo Metro, he encountered the pyramids. Today, he's president of the France-Egypt Society.
You will see that Khufu put magical devices in this pyramid. For instance, there are many recesses. You don't know why. The shaft... of course, the Khufu pyramid is unique for shaft. You have 4 shafts. I think that they have a very significant function. And the construction of that shaft was not easy at all for many reasons. You have a wall perfectly well dressed with stones, and the last one are hewn slantwise, as you see, with the appropriate slope. Then in the upper stone is hewn exactly the section of the shaft. If the Egyptians have accepted these complications, this is a proof of the very significant function of the shaft.
All these sort of building, all these sort of shafts, definitely they have been made for specific reasons. They are not haphazard done by the ancient Egyptians, but they never left us anything to tell us what are these things is. No plans for the pyramids, no sketches for the pyramids, nothing.
For the next 80 years, these shafts remained an unsolved mystery. Then in 1963, one pyramid researcher looked to the stars for clues. An American astronomer, Virginia Trimble, was asked by a researcher from Egypt, Alexander Badoui, to try and explore the hunch that the shafts originally pointed at something in the heavens.
How important the sky is to a culture, I think, depends mostly on the weather. The skies of Egypt are dark, or they were 4,000 years ago. They are generally very clear. The Egyptians covered the ceilings of many of their tombs with paintings of the sky showing the patterns of their constellations and the names of the gods and the pictures of the gods placed within those stars. Unfortunately, they went in for artistic arrangement rather than accurate arrangement, and in most cases we cannot be sure which pattern of stars corresponds to which modern constellation.
The problem is compounded by the fact that the position of the stars in the sky today is not the same as in the time of the ancient Egyptians. This is due to the phenomenon of precession. Day and night are caused by the Earth spinning on its polar axis once every 24 hours. But what is less well known is that the poles themselves circulate in a wobble-like motion once every 26,000 years. The effect of this precessional movement, as it's called, is that the height the stars arc through the sky changes with time. The stars, of course, appear to travel through the sky every night, rising and setting like the sun. The highest point in the nightly arc of a star is due south, and it's called its culmination, and it's this height that changes due to precession. Virginia Trimble showed that the constellation of Orion, for example, dropped by about 1 degree per century as you go back in time.
We realized very quickly that there weren't many bright stars that pass over those southern shafts. The most conspicuous ones at about the right time were Delta Epsilon and Zeta Orionis, the three stars of Orion's belt. This is Delta Orionis, the brightest of the stars in Orion's belt. This is the declination. And here at 100-year intervals from 4000 BC down to almost the present are the positions. Here is the period 2500 BC when the pyramids were almost certainly constructed.
The angle of the southern shaft of the king's chamber is 45 degrees. As their calculations reached back to the time of the building of the Great Pyramid, they were in for quite a surprise. The shaft lined up perfectly with Orion's belt.
Which constellations the Egyptians saw in the sky is still something of a mystery. They had a hippopotamus, and we really don't know which set of stars corresponded to their hippopotamus. But they had one constellation that was an erect, standing man, Osiris, the god. And the one constellation that looks like a standing man to everyone is Orion. And the identity between a deceased pharaoh and the god Osiris made Orion immediately a candidate for a shaft whose purpose was to enable the soul of the pharaoh to communicate between earth and sky.
We have seen how this shaft of the king's chamber points directly to the belt of Orion. By the way, when Trimble took it up to there in 1964, the next step was to ask, therefore, where do the shafts in the queen's chamber point? So I did the calculations, and I was amazed to discover that the southern shaft of the queen's chamber pointed to Sirius, his consort, Isis. It was fantastic revelation.
Bombarded by all these astronomical alignment theories, it seemed important to take a step back and talk to established experts on the subject. Since the 1930s, Dr. Ethan Edwards has built up a reputation as the world's leading authority on the pyramids. He agrees that the stars played a role in the pyramids' design.
The star shafts, as I'm calling them, were directed onto certain stars. The idea being that the spirit of the king could use them to reach those stars. I think the oldest and most important, perhaps, was the northern star shaft. That was directed at the circumpolar stars. We know from the pyramid texts that they attached very great importance to the circumpolar stars because they never disappeared, they never died. The Egyptians called them the indestructibles, the Ikamusek.
The pyramids had a stellar connection, and this has been known for a very long time. And as I understand it, one of the shafts certainly lines up with the constellation of Orion. So yes, it's quite possible there is significance in this.
So the basis of the star theory has eminent backers from British museum keepers past and present. But the debate over the significance of the shafts is far from over.
The pyramid texts tell us that the king had a boat in which he used to move around among these stars. They don't tell us what he did when he got there, but at any rate, obviously, they were desirable places to be.
The shafts could have ritual significance. It's a matter of dispute. There are some people who feel that they have a purely practical function, that they're ventilation shafts. There are others who believe, and Beauval and Gilbert are among them, that they have a ritual function. This is also consistent with what we know about the Egyptians' beliefs.
They were channels to the stars. They were going to assist the soul of the dead king to join Osiris and become one and live in this celestial kingdom next to the celestial Nile. That's what it seems the most logical and ritualistic purpose of the shafts. We see those shafts shooting in perfect alignment towards the stars. The degree of accuracy is astounding. The base of the pyramid is within minutes of arc. It is very, very difficult for us even today to set monuments of that size. The base of the pyramid is 230 meters long. To walk around the pyramid, you're walking a kilometer. Now, obviously, they used stars to align their monuments. They didn't have the compass, and even if they did have the compass, you couldn't get that accuracy with a handheld compass. So we have a monument that expresses an architecture based on astronomy.
As Beauval became more and more aware of the amazing accuracy of the three great pyramids of Giza, a paradox began to develop. because they appeared to be accurate in all respects except one.
Now, there is something baffling about this plan that we see, these three pyramids that we see on the ground. Three pyramids next to each other, two of almost identical size, in diagonal alignment. And yet, this was the puzzling question. The third pyramid was much smaller and offset to the left. It just didn't make sense. Now, if you were Menkaura, a powerful pharaoh, as powerful as the other two pharaohs who built the previous pyramids, why would you build a smaller pyramid? And indeed, why would you offset it to the left? There had to be an explanation, and the explanation seemed to us to be with the stars.
We know from the pyramid texts that each pharaoh saw himself as the latest incarnation of Osiris's son, Horus. He was seen as a living god. Bauval and Gilbert wondered how, after a pharaoh died, he could be a god in the heavens and a god on earth, as Osiris had been. Mummification was part of the answer, as this was clearly intended to preserve his body for eternity. The pyramids seemed to be connected with both, sending the pharaoh to the stars and somehow being the dead pharaoh on earth. Out in the desert, Bauval chose a pitch-dark night when the stars could be seen in all their glory to reveal an extraordinary breakthrough in his research.
I couldn't find an explanation for the strange layout plan of the three pyramids of Giza. And then, on a night like this, I was in the desert, camping with some friends. In the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. I got up and stood there on the dune. And a friend of mine joined me. He was a yachtsman. And he was trying to explain to me how to find the star Sirius in the sky. And he pointed at the three stars of Orion. There they were, three stars in a row. And he explained how they were directly above Sirius. And then he said, actually, the stars are not actually in a row. The top star is slightly offset to the left. And there I had it.
Phenomenal as it is, the theory of correlation between the pyramids and Orion's belt was only the beginning. To understand its significance, Bauval looked for a wider plan. He started with Egypt's most obvious feature, the Nile. He looked at where the pyramids were in relationship to the Nile and the angle they made with it, and compared them with the position of Orion's belt in relation to the Milky Way. It then occurred to Bauval to look at the other two existing pyramids of the 4th dynasty, which were built for unknown reasons some miles away from Giza. Bauval discovered from original graffiti that the first one at Abu Rawash, built by Jedafra, a son of Khufu, was also named after a star. The second one was built 3 miles from Giza at Zawiyat al-Aryan. He then looked at the overall pattern and was staggered. Osiris was the constellation of Orion. Therefore, Osiris on Earth was the pyramids of the Giza area. The Egyptians were attempting to build no less than heaven on earth. The theories of Bauval and Gilbert, coming after decades of research into ancient Egypt, are radical. So what of the experts? The initial reaction of the academic world was surprising.
pyramids, in general, are not very popular with Egyptologists because I think they're too plentiful. There are about 100 of them. And also, I think they've acquired something of a bad name because they've attracted so many cranks.
I must confess, I've never been somebody fascinated with the pyramids, although, of course, as a student, one studies them. It is a curious thing. The Great Pyramid has this power over people. In my view, it has the power to destroy common sense.
We are ready to hear everything about the pyramids. We have pyramid power books. We have pyramidologists. We have people who are thinking, no, the pyramids in Egypt and in Mexico and in Peru have been built by people who came from the stars, from heavens. This is not human hands. And, you know, how can this Egyptian build such a huge thing? It's people came from heavens and they have built it for them.
I can't really offer any kind of opinion on the value of the work of the so-called pyramidology. Well, they're called pyramidians, of course, and so-called pyramidology. I could only say that most of what I could understand doesn't really make much sense to me.
Living in the Pentland Hills outside Edinburgh is Mary Brooke, a former lecturer in astronomy and wife of a now retired Astronomer Royal for Scotland, Herman Brooke.
One of my husband's predecessors, Charles Piazzi Smythe, a very distinguished and clever man who was Astronomer Royal for Scotland for 42 years. He did a lot of excellent work in laboratory spectroscopy as well as astronomy. But he had one eccentric streak, and that was his firm belief in the symbolism of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which he thought had been built under divine inspiration. At the time also, there was a very strong evangelical movement in Britain. There were people who were worried about the theory of evolution. There were people who worried about the findings of the geologists who said that the Earth was extremely old and so on. And they were a bit worried that the authority of the Bible was being undermined. Now, the theory was that the pyramid was built with labour of the Israelites when they were in captivity in Egypt, and that though the building was a monument or a tomb to a pharaoh, that hidden in it was the design which was inspired by God. The cult of the pyramid is still very much alive, and I think myself that Piazzi Smythe had a lot to do with it.
So here in the snowy wastes of Scotland was the source of much of the ridicule to which pyramid ideas are subjected. But are Beauval and Gilbert part of this cult? Or is their theory held back by Piazzi Smythe's legacy?
It's not completely inconsistent with the Egyptians' belief about the afterlife and the way that they saw the stars having a function in this. But I think too much is read into that in this case. My own view is that the position of the pyramids had just as much and perhaps more to do with geology and existing topography.
Jean Carizel has applied his knowledge of rock substrata to the Giza Plateau. He is not so sure that the reason for the offset of the small pyramid is connected with the terrain.
I don't think there is any rational reason from the topographical point of view for a non-perfect alignment of the three pyramids. The line going through the centers of the two first pyramids is not going through the center of the last one, the Menkaure pyramid. There is no obstacles concerning the relief. I cannot explain why there is this anomaly. There is certainly another reason relating probably to astronomy. And I think personally that the layout of the three pyramids has been designed from the very beginning by Khufu.
There are lots of pyramids in Egypt, not only one pyramid. Of course, the greatest are the three pyramids. But try to put them according to astronomical theory, I can't agree with that and for the moment.
I can't pass judgment on it, but I think it's something that has to be aired. And I think that Mr. Beauval has performed an important service in giving this scenario. I've no doubt it'll be criticised. Bound to be. Such things are when they start.
The layout of the three pyramids, just speaking as an astronomer, is very reminiscent of the pattern of the three stars in the belt of Orion. There's no question about it. For a start, the three pyramids appear to be equidistant, just as the three stars in the constellation of Orion are equidistant, with the third star slightly offset from the other two and slightly fainter as well, just as the third pyramid is smaller and slightly offset the line of the other two. It's certainly a very intriguing idea, there's no question about it, but I think we would have to go back into the minds of the ancient Egyptians to know whether, in fact, that's what they intended to do.
I'm very sceptical about the larger view, Beauval's larger view of the constellation correlating to the pyramids on the ground. This would imply that the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom were able to reproduce on land over a huge distance a kind of map of the sky picked out from various constellations. I find that very hard to believe. I find it improbable.
It doesn't seem to me to be an impossible idea. More than that, I wouldn't care to say.
It seems then that for the moment the jury is still out, but Beauval and Gilbert have not yet presented the full case. Stars and shafts, maps and heavens may well align, but still, what does it all mean? Beauval uses his computer to examine the northern stars as they would have appeared over Egypt at the time of the Fourth Dynasty, about 4,500 years ago. It seems that the ancient Egyptians saw the northern star constellations, particularly the Great Bear and the Little Bear, as powerful overseers of the sky. They revolved above them all year, regular as clockwork. Other constellations, Orion for example, disappear for 70 days of the year. They die. This is because the Earth is circling round the Sun, and so the portion of the stars that the spinning Earth reveals each night changes. Each of these lower stars was welcomed back by the Egyptians when it reappeared, as you would welcome a departed soul or god that had been away for some time. At dawn, just as the stars are disappearing, you get a glimpse of a new star which has been out of sight for 70 days. This was the dawn rising, or helical rising as it is called, of that star. It was reborn. The Egyptians knew the day of its birthday from their calendar, and the exact moment by looking into the northern sky and observing the position of the permanently visible Great and Little Bears, almost as if they were the hands of a giant star clock. This brings us back to the angles of the shafts. It seems that not only were these pyramids of Giza a representation of the heavenly kingdom above, but they were also the ancient Egyptians' version of a sort of Cape Canaveral, with the ability to propel the soul of a pharaoh to distant destinations in the sky. To understand why, we need to go back to the pyramid texts and the Book of the Dead. New translations of the pyramid text tell us much about how the pharaohs regarded themselves. They saw themselves as part of a direct line going back to Osiris, the first god king who founded Egypt. They were his embodiment. They were god kings, and each pharaoh attempted to reenact the life and death of Osiris. When a pharaoh died, he was mummified in the same way that Isis had reconstituted Osiris. They were then encased in a splendid outer shell to look like Osiris. This gold sarcophagus of Tutankhamun is the most magnificent example that has so far been discovered. These papyri of the Book of the Dead in the British Museum tell us of one of the great ascension rituals that would have followed the preparation of the mummy. This was known as the opening of the mouth ceremony. His consort and his still mortal son must cause new life to stir in him. This had to be done at an exact moment, the dawn rising of Orion. the pharaoh must be reborn as a god. Beauval and Gilbert imagine this most dramatic and ceremonial moment could well have taken place in the Queen's chamber. The son and wife of the dead pharaoh performed this ceremony with an adze in the shape of the little bear. This was often made of iron taken from fallen meteorites. At that time, this was their only source of iron. Every now and then, they saw these meteorites come thundering down through the sky, and to them it was real evidence that the star world existed. This strange iron substance that occurred nowhere on Earth they thought was a dribble of semen from the gods, and this led them to think that the gods had iron bones as well.
I mean, who can imagine just exactly what would have happened? The fantastic costumes that they would have been wearing, the sense of excitement, the wailing women dressed like Isis, and the dead pharaoh in his coffin is stood upright.
The stars aligning themselves with the shaft in the north. The constellation of Orion just about to rise at dawn on the horizon.
And then the son of the pharaoh, probably wearing a hawk mask, takes up this small adze tool, which is shaped like the northern constellation, and strikes open the mouth of the pharaoh, and takes another tool, plunges it in, and opens the mouth.
Forces them with the instrument, probably breaks the jaws. Mouth is open, the air comes in, the pharaoh is alive, he is reborn with the stars.
So the opening of the mouth ceremony, performed at the exact moment of the rebirth of Orion, had in the minds of the ancient Egyptians caused a new sort of half-life to stir in the dead king. Rebirth and new life were very important to them, and god-kings were required to have awesome sexual potency to enable them to copulate with goddesses.
The pharaoh has a further duty to perform as the arisen Osiris. He has to make sure that there is a future heir to the throne who can inherit the title of Horus. And to do that, he has to impregnate Isis, his wife, who is symbolized by the star Sirius.
Now, the next thing that would have happened is that they would have turned the mummy of the king to the south, in alignment with the southern shaft. He probably had an erect phallus attached to his mummified body. And his duty before departing into the afterworld was to seed the womb of Isis, his mythological wife, represented by the star Sirius.
They believed that after her dawn rising, her rebirth, she became a perfect adult capable of bearing children when she reached the south meridian at dawn.
And as this star aligned itself at dawn with the southern shaft, with the king facing it, that is probably the moment of the seeding of the womb of Isis. Nine and a half months later, the star would rise in the east at dawn, the helical rising of Sirius, the great moment of rebirth. The heir to the throne was symbolically reborn as her son, Horus, the son of Isis. The Egyptians had the cosmos near to them. They saw the stars as part of their environment. They saw their gods close to them. Their faith was at reach. They could see their destiny in the sky. In many ways, they were closer to their faith and their gods than we are today.
The legend of Osiris and Isis powerfully explained the existence of the ancient Egyptians' world. It told the story of good and evil, rebirth and redemption. In effect, they had a huge stained glass window in front of them every night. Boval and Gilbert offer a theory which fits the facts derived from the latest technology, but they help us uncover the mystery of an ancient vision of the world and the cosmos.
In our modern scientific world, with all the technological wisdom we have, we are really no different from our ancestors. We stand like children in front of creation with the same questions. Where have we come from? Where are we going?
The mystery remains.
I fly up from you, O men. I am not for the earth, I am for the sky. I have soared to the sky as a heron. I have kissed the sky as a falcon. I am the essence of a god, the son of a god, the messenger of a god. Behold, the faithful and loving Osiris has come, as the stars of Orion, the beautiful one. I have come that I may glorify Orion. My soul is a star of gold, and with him I will traverse the sky forever.
This strange and beautiful poetry comes from hieroglyphs carved by the ancient Egyptians on sarcophagi and on the walls of tombs. These pyramid texts, as they are called, are some of the earliest religious writings known to man. Although they were deciphered over 150 years ago, today they're being re-examined in the light of new theories about the ancient Egyptians' perception of their world and their man-made mountains. Going back to the beginnings of Egyptian history, from the time of the Roman occupation, is a long journey. Back through the Roman emperors to Augustus, then Cleopatra, the last of Egypt's Ptolemaic Greek rulers. Back to the first Greek conqueror, Alexander the Great. Adrian Gilbert. They are taking us into the crumbled pyramid of the 5th dynasty pharaoh Unas, where the first clues to their new discoveries lie. In spite of its pitiful state, this pyramid is the first to contain any formal writing.
Now look at this. Is this fantastic? Unlike the 4th dynasty pyramids, which were totally devoid of text, these crumbled 5th dynasty pyramids are full of these fantastic writings.
Just look up at the ceiling. I mean, it's absolutely covered with stars. It's just like being out under the night sky.
They constitute the oldest body of religious writing in history. And they're there on the walls to help the dead king into his voyage into the afterworld.
These are pyramid texts and accompanied the mummy that would have been in this tomb, hopefully providing the required mystical hymns and prayers to help the royal owner's journey into the next world. The act of inscribing an idea did more than merely record it. It had magical significance. It was a spell, and had the power to ensure that the written sentiment would actually happen. This, for example, is a snake with its head cut off. This would ensure protection of the soul from snakebite. These texts also show this shape known as an ankh, which symbolized the life force, and their reverence for the Standing where the desert drops down into the Nile Valley in Egypt are the 3 pyramids of Giza. This is the Great Pyramid, the largest of the 3 and the most massive man-made edifice on Earth. In the 24th century before Christ, 30 million tons of rock were hewn and dragged over the desert and formed into these monuments, which are to an accuracy and size that we could barely emulate today. These mansions of eternity, as they were called, were faced in gleaming white Tura limestone, and possibly with a huge gold cap on the top. In spite of the staggering statistics of their construction, there were few hard facts to explain what the pyramids were for, until recently. A new breed of high-tech archaeologists has presented startling evidence which may explain the unknown beliefs of distant Egyptian history. In particular, as we shall show, they are revealing extraordinary insights into the mysterious star-worshipping cult of the ancient Egyptians. Indeed, they believe there may be some cosmic design to these ancient structures. Can the modern age of technology shed light on the spiritual world of the past? Then the Persian kings, then 31 dynasties of pharaohs encompassing the reigns of almost 400 individual kings. Taking us back 5,000 years to the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, who first united and civilized the kingdoms of Upper Egypt along the Nile and the fertile delta known as Lower Egypt. The period we are interested in is the early beginning of Egyptian civilization, the Old Kingdom, known as the Pyramid Age, and in particular the 4th dynasty, which lasted from about 2600 BC to 2500. In just the short 100-year span of this dynasty, conceivably one person's lifetime, all these near-perfect pyramids were built. What vision drove those pharaohs of the 4th dynasty to such size and precision, while their successors in the 5th dynasty settled for this? In spite of their dilapidated state, they contain a clue to the mystery of the achievement of the previous 4th dynasty pyramids. These pyramids are at Saqqara, 10 miles south of the Great Pyramid, near the ancient capital of Memphis. The builders of these now ruined pyramids undoubtedly knew the legends of their ancestors, including the ancient Egyptian worship of the stars, and their belief that the stars were manifestations of their gods. Two authors who have just written a book on the subject are Robert Bauval and great god Atum. And these writings talk repeatedly of the pharaoh becoming a star and traveling to the constellations.
This hieroglyph symbolizes Sobed, which is their name for Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, which they associated with the goddess Isis.
And here is the name of the king Unas in the oval-shaped cartouche. And here we are told he is given life and he is the beloved of the supreme god, his father Atum.
Now the pyramid texts, together with the ancient later papyrus, known as the Book of the Dead,
tell us about the beliefs of these ancient people.
And most importantly, they tell us how the Egyptians believed civilization began in their country so many thousands of years ago.
The creation myth of the ancient Egyptians is constantly repeated in pyramid texts on the walls of tombs and on funerary plaques. It was of prime importance to them, and they saw each successive pharaoh reenacting it.
In the beginning, Atum-Ra, the great sun god, looked down on the newly formed land. He sent one of his grandsons, Osiris, to live among its people, to teach them goodness and civilization. Osiris, both man and god, walked the land of Egypt with his consort Isis, and it became a beautiful place.